Today we are diving into a really shocking decision from the Philippine Supreme Court. It's about a man, Ron Ron San Pedro, who was convicted of rape, not just once but twice by two different courts, and yet the highest court in the land completely acquitted him. You gotta ask, how on earth does that happen? Well, let's get into it.
So, here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll start with that stunning acquittal. Then, we'll rewind the clock and look at the awful crime he was accused of. After that, we'll see how just one piece of evidence started to pull the whole case apart. And finally, we'll look at the fundamental legal standard that was the key to setting him free.
All right, let's jump right in at the end of the story, because honestly, it's the most jaw-dropping part. How does a guy who's been found guilty by two separate courts just walk free?
And there it is. That's the final word from the Supreme Court. It's not appealable. It completely wipes out the previous convictions. So the huge question, the one we're here to answer, is why? What did the Supreme Court see that two other courts apparently missed?
Okay, so now let's go all the way back to the beginning. Because to really get why he was acquitted, you have to understand why two different courts were so absolutely convinced that he was guilty. The case laid out by the prosecution was, frankly, powerful and really disturbing.
You can see this case took over a decade to work its way through the system. First, the regional trial court convicts him. Then the Court of Appeals takes a look and says, yep, we agree. For years, the legal system was completely on the same page, right up until it hit that final stage.
The charge itself was just incredibly serious. The victim was a 19-year-old woman who was deaf and mute, which made her so exceptionally vulnerable. I mean, think about it. She couldn't speak, she couldn't hear. That means she couldn't scream for help, and she couldn't verbally protest what she said was happening to her.
And the prosecution built what really looked like an ironclad case. Of course, they had the victim's own testimony, but that was backed up by this crucial medical legal report. It showed not just injuries you might expect, but also extragenital injuries, which to the lower courts was clear proof that this was a violent, forceful assault.
And this part of her testimony really highlights how she reacted. She didn't wait. She said she ran straight to the police, used hand gestures to report the rape, and identified her attacker, which led to his arrest right then and there. For the lower courts, this was the action of someone who was telling the truth and desperately seeking justice.
So you've got a consistent story, you have medical evidence, and you have a victim who went straight for help. How in the world did this all fall apart? Well, the answer is in a single official document. And believe it or not, it came from the exact same police station the victim ran to for help.
Yeah. This became the multi-million-dollar question, because after the victim reported this horrible crime and the suspect was arrested, something really, really unusual happened.
Now, just look at the language here. This is an entry from the official police logbook, the blotter. Instead of talking about a crime, it records a misunderstanding. And even more critically, it says there was a settlement that was signed by both of them. And during the trial, when the defense lawyer got to ask questions, that's called cross-examination, the victim confirmed it. She acknowledged that, yes, that was her signature on the settlement. And she confirmed that the police were right there assisting her when she signed it. So this wasn't some secret deal. It happened right there with the authorities present.
So here it is. This is the core problem. This direct, undeniable contradiction. How can both of these things be true? You can't have a person report a violent rape and then, in the same place on the same day, sign a document agreeing to settle the whole thing as just a misunderstanding. The prosecution never really gave a good answer for that.
So, how did the Supreme Court deal with this massive contradiction? Well, it all came down to one of the most important fundamental ideas in all of criminal law.
And that is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. This is the highest bar in the legal system, and it's there for a very good reason: to protect innocent people from being wrongly convicted. The entire responsibility, 100%, is on the prosecution to get over that bar and eliminate any and all reasonable doubt. If just one little piece of reasonable doubt remains, the case fails. And for the Supreme Court, that police blotter, that settlement, was the very definition of a reasonable doubt. Why would a rape victim sign something like that? The court didn't pretend to know the answer, but the fact that the question existed and that the prosecution couldn't explain it away was enough to sink the whole case.
And look, this isn't just some weird one-off technicality. The court has been incredibly consistent on this. This quote from a different case shows that even when you're fighting very serious problems, that right to be presumed innocent comes first.
And that burden never shifts to the accused. He doesn't have to prove he's innocent. The state has to prove he's guilty, period. So if the state's evidence has a massive, unexplained hole in it, like a bizarre settlement agreement, then that constitutional standard for a conviction just hasn't been met.
And this is such a critical point to understand. The court isn't some all-knowing machine that figures out the absolute truth. Its job is to be an impartial referee. It can only make a decision based on the evidence that they presented. And if that evidence is flawed or contradictory, it can't convict, no matter what anyone might privately suspect happened.
This quote, straight from the decision itself, just perfectly sums up the court's thinking. It's basically the court admitting, look, we're human, we can make mistakes. It's saying that while your gut might scream that someone's guilty, the law demands solid proof. And if that proof isn't there, their hands are tied.
Ultimately, the acquittal of Ron Ron San Pedro makes us all face this really tough, fundamental question. And the principle of proof beyond a reasonable doubt is the system's clear answer. It says that protecting an innocent person, even if it means a guilty person might walk free, is the higher, more important value. It can be a very difficult thing to accept, but it is the absolute bedrock of this legal system.